Though you might not have ever thought about this, the job of being a park ranger can be, pardon my language here, but dangerous as f***. This job involves so much more than just like standing at a visitor center and directing tourists to where the bathrooms are. Park rangers are law enforcement officers, which means that they have to deal with many of the same risks that normal police officers do. But in addition to that, they must also patrol the remote backcountry and all of its hazards. And they also have to be the first ones to confront dangerous animals that are putting the park's visitors at risk. And so because of all this, it's no surprise that on many occasions, park rangers have died, been murdered, or just straight up disappeared in the line of duty. For today's video, I've picked out 3 stories of park rangers who died while doing their jobs, but I'm gonna be doing more than just telling you their stories and then moving on. I have some questions about each of these stories, questions that even years after the story took place remain unanswered. So I'll be highlighting these unanswered questions as I go along in this video, and I also want to hear your potential theories, answers to these questions, or your other unanswered questions in the comment section as well, respectfully, of course. So with that said, please join me on a trip to one of the most beautiful places in all of the United States. That would be the great state of Colorado. I want to go back. This trip is free, it costs you nothing, but you gotta hit the subscribe button to cover your admission, especially if you're a repeat viewer and you haven't yet subscribed. Okay, so let's go to Rocky Mountain National Park. Around 11 a.m. on July 29th, 2005, a coworker dropped Ranger Jeff Christensen off at the Chapin Pass trailhead, where he was gonna start a days-long backcountry patrol of the Mummy Range. About 2 hours after he was dropped off, he briefly encountered a couple from Oklahoma. They were hiking along, and they described Ranger Christensen as, quote, chipper, and they also said that he was moving well through the difficult terrain. But unfortunately, after Ranger Christensen parted ways with these hikers, he was never seen alive ever again. He was hiking solo, and these solo backcountry patrols are very common for rangers. I mean, it's just part of their job. But as a safety precaution, rangers do carry radios with them. Now, the area that Ranger Christensen was patrolling that day was definitely remote, and as I've established, it was rugged and difficult, but it was known to have radio coverage. Later on in the evening, Ranger Christensen failed to check in on his radio, and then the next morning, he didn't arrive for his scheduled shift. His fellow rangers in Rocky Mountain National Park knew that something was wrong, and so they launched a search. They did not half-ass this search either. Over 200 people began combing the backcountry, searching along Ranger Christensen's planned route for that day. They even brought in dogs, I believe, up to 5 of them, and they also used aircraft, helicopters, spotter planes, things like that. I mean, they went all out. This was a massive search effort, and it lasted for over a week. But unfortunately, on August 6th, a hiker would accidentally stumble across a disturbing sight that would halt the search in its tracks. So you can probably tell that this story is about to take a pretty disturbing turn. And so before we get to that, I do want to make things fun for just a second longer here and tell you about Trainwell. Trainwell is the sponsor of this video, and they've honestly made it possible for us to tell these stories and to bring awareness to these cases. And they've also made it possible for me to stay consistent with my workouts. And for that, I need to thank my Trainwell coach, Ryan. So yeah, dude, shout out to Ryan. He's the man. So Trainwell is fitness made easy, and the way that it works is that they hook you up with a virtual trainer who will then go and create these customized guided workouts that are gonna fit your goals, your schedule, and honestly, just like your current situation in life. And as an example of this, when I did my onboarding call with Ryan, again, shout out to Ryan, he's so sick, he's the man. I was a little bit worried because I'm kind of in between places right now. That's why I have a new setup back here. I don't have access to a gym, and I'm also training for some upcoming hikes, which is a pretty unique scenario. I was like, I don't know how much Ryan is going to be able to work with this. Shout out Ryan, but he told me that all of these things was no problem at all, and he quickly, I'm talking in a matter of a day, came up with a diverse like body weight workout routine that also factored in my hikes and everything could be done at home. I am going to be back in the gym in a few months here, and so once I can't wait to see what Ryan comes up with for me then. Shout out Ryan. The thing is, I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this. I have for sure. Coming up with a new workout routine is very daunting. And so it's super awesome that Trainwell basically takes care of all of that for you. They give you a customized workout plan that's super easy to follow, by the way. And they even have these instructional videos. So if you're trying like a new exercise or a new movement, it can be kind of tricky, obviously. The app, the videos they have on there, it makes it super easy to learn. And the thing is, Trainwell is so much more than just an app, right? I mean, your personal trainer is going to check in with you regularly. They're going to give you feedback. They can adjust your workout plans according to how things are going. They can even hop on video calls whenever you have questions. I mean, I'm telling you, Ryan has been so helpful. I got to shout out Ryan. Shout out Ryan. Trainwell has helped me stay consistent in my workouts leading up to my hikes this summer. And not to mention, they've also helped me avoid injuries too, which is something that I would always end up with when I was just training on my own. And it's something that Ryan and I have really paid close attention to in my customized workout plan. So shout out Ryan. I'm pretty confident that you're going to get a trainer who's just as awesome as Ryan is. But if for whatever reason you're just not clicking with your trainer, you can also switch to a new trainer in the app at any time. So yeah, I think you're going to love Trainwell. And if you click the link at the top of the description, you're actually going to get 14 days free with your own expert personal trainer. So one more time, click that link. You'll also be doing the channel a massive favor when you do so. Shout out Ryan. He's super awesome. And okay, with that said, let's get back to the stories. So this hiker finds Ranger Jeff Christensen, and he was obviously, at this point, you could probably tell, not found alive. Ranger Christensen was found dead from an apparent fall. He was located in an area that was very high up between two rugged 13,000-foot mountains. And unfortunately, investigators were not able to determine like why he fell or even where he fell from. Park spokeswoman Kyle Patterson was quoted saying, "Anyone who's hiked in high elevation terrain knows the things that can go wrong. It could be a loose rock. He could have lost his balance or stubbed his toe. It could have been a shoelace. We'll never know. These kinds of areas are extremely unforgiving if you fall." So they weren't able to determine exactly what happened, but they were able to determine, disturbingly, that Ranger Christensen didn't die immediately after the fall. His body was reportedly found with like bandages on his head. And so investigators believe that he actually must have survived initially and then, patched himself up, walked a short distance before he finally went unconscious. So, I mean, that's tough. It's disturbing. And it also raises a few unanswered questions about what would otherwise be a pretty straightforward accident in the backcountry. My biggest question is, why didn't Ranger Christensen use his radio to call for help after his fall? Now, if he was knocked unconscious or died immediately, then that would obviously explain things here. But again, he was aware enough to like put some bandages on his head and to like attempt to rescue himself. It seems to me that if he was capable of doing those things, then he would have also been capable of using his radio to try to contact somebody. Now, it is reported that rescuers heard a few like radio clicks around the time that it's estimated Ranger Christensen was injured, but there's obviously no way to confirm where those clicks came from. And another potential answer is that by the time Ranger Christensen was found, his radio battery was completely dead. So it's definitely possible that something happened to his radio before he fell, the battery died, and that's why he never made a call. But it's also definitely possible that the battery just drained over the course of the search. There were also apparently some gunshots heard in the area around the time of his injury, but when they found his body, they also found his firearm and they found all of his ammunition with none missing, which indicates that he had not fired his weapon. Another unanswered question that I have is actually about Ranger Christensen's choice of route that day. So apparently he had actually strayed from what he reported his planned route to be. And while he was off of his route, that's when he fell. His reasoning for straying from his planned route is not known, and it's certainly possible that he would have been found sooner if he had been on his planned route, because obviously that's where searchers zeroed in on after he disappeared. To this day, we still don't know why he decided to change his route on the fly, although I did hear it described as a quote shortcut in one of the articles that I read, so maybe he did it to just save some miles. I don't know. I'm probably overthinking this. It's just a very bizarre and complicated situation, and it's also worth mentioning that rescuers did not place any blame on Ranger Christensen for straying from his route. Apparently this is common practice for rangers, and it's totally within their rules and guidelines. They're allowed to leave their routes. His fall was also so severe that even if he had been found quickly on, his planned route, it's still unlikely that he would have survived, unfortunately. Rocky Mountain National Park's chief ranger at the time said, quote, "Had we known exactly where he was going, it's questionable whether we could have responded in a timely amount to get to such a remote area and get him evacuated to get the medical care he needed, which was essentially surgery." So leave a comment and let me know what you think of this story, and if you have any more questions about what happened, some unanswered questions, and if you have any feedback on it, please let me know. May Ranger Jeff Christensen rest in peace. My heart goes out to his friends and his family. Unfortunately, we'll probably never know the answers to the unanswered questions I've raised. And unfortunately, in our next story, there's an even more difficult unanswered question, if you can believe it. And I also think that I can pretty confidently say that we're never gonna find the answer to this one. Real quick, I'd like to call out Rocky Mountain Rescue Group, which is a volunteer search and rescue group based in Boulder County, Colorado. Now, I'm not sure if they were involved with the search for Ranger Christensen, but I did notice that they have a no charge for rescue policy, which is awesome in my opinion, and so they're going to be my give back call out for this week. I've made a donation to them, and I encourage you to do so as well. Even if it's just a few dollars, doesn't have to be anything crazy. I will have their website linked in the description. In the 1970s, Dwayne McClure landed what many outdoor enthusiasts would consider a dream job when he was hired as a park ranger in Yellowstone National Park. I've visited a pretty good amount of national parks in my 28-year life so far, but Yellowstone is one that I have not been to yet. And I think that's a shame, because I'm sure that pretty much all of you are familiar with it. It's widely regarded as one of the most beautiful national parks in all of the United States, and so I'd really like to visit. By May of 1980, Ranger McClure had been working for the National Park Service for 10 years, and I'm almost certain that he had been gathering experience in the outdoors for far longer than that. One of the outdoor pursuits that Ranger McClure was quite skilled at was canoeing. Now, some of you might think that canoeing is like super easy. You're just out there paddling casually. What's the big deal? It can definitely be easy like this, don't get me wrong, but there is a big difference between paddling around on like a calm pond in the middle of the summer and paddling on a remote lake in the spring when the water is extremely cold and the wind is picking up. You can probably tell how things can go wrong in that situation. You gotta be careful in those situations. That situation is unfortunately exactly what Ranger McClure paddled into on the morning of May 22nd, 1980. Not only was Ranger McClure a skilled canoeist, but he was also known to be, quote, precise and cautious. Because of that, it was very concerning when he didn't return from his planned patrol of the south shore of West Thumb on Yellowstone Lake. Attempts to contact him by radio failed, and so the National Park Service quickly jumped into action and launched a search for the missing ranger. And after they did this, it didn't take long for them to find a disturbing clue. So early in the morning, the following day after he went missing, Ranger McClure's canoe was found on a remote beach roughly a mile from his intended destination. But the thing is, his canoe wasn't found like pulled up neatly on the beach or tied down to anything. It was found in a condition known as swamped. Essentially, the canoe had been overturned, it was filled with water, and it had drifted ashore. Obviously, that was a very disturbing find, but it was also a major clue. Searchers hoped that the overturned canoe would lead them to Ranger McClure's location. I mean, it's not unheard of for people to get thrown out of their canoe to wash up on shore, and then still be located alive. Unfortunately, though, that is not what happened in Ranger McClure's situation. They didn't find any additional gear in the canoe. They didn't find any footprints that led away from the canoe. And worst of all, they just could not find any sign of Ranger McClure himself. They didn't give up there, obviously. They continued their search efforts after they discovered the swamp canoe, but unfortunately, they were never able to locate the missing ranger. His case basically went cold, and roughly a year after he disappeared, he was declared legally dead. I guess he officially remains missing to this day. It's a very strange and mysterious case, and so the obvious question here is, what the hell happened to him? So, due to his canoe washing up on shore, it's presumed that he drowned, of course. Yellowstone Lake has extremely cold water, especially in the spring when he was out there. So if he did fall out of the canoe and he was like too far away from the shore to swim and get to safety, he would have undoubtedly become hypothermic, and it would have happened fast. And so my unanswered question isn't so much, how Ranger McClure died, because that is almost certainly what happened. My unanswered question is, how did his canoe capsize in the first place? And also, how come his body was never recovered? This is very disturbing because the weather and the conditions on the day that he went missing were reportedly fine. There was apparently some wind on the lake that day, but it wasn't anything extreme. And as an experienced and skilled canoeist, Ranger McClure would have almost certainly been more than equipped to deal with this. And besides, my understanding is that his route would have mostly been hugging the shore of the lake. I'm not 100% on that, but from looking at maps, that's what it seems like. I don't think he was intending to be out like miles in open water exposed like that. Although again, that's an assumption. I just don't understand what could have caused him to swamp his canoe. And again, it's also so strange that his body was never found. At this point, I hate to say it, but it's unlikely that we're ever gonna get answers to those questions, but you never know, I guess. Leave a comment and let me know what you think happened here, and just let me know what you think of this sad story. My heart goes out to Ranger McClure, and may he rest in peace. Though his fate is a mystery, there's never been any indication, at least that I'm aware of, that foul play was involved with his disappearance. I think it's important to note that. But for this next story, that was definitely not the case. So let's flash forward to 2012. New Year's Day 2012 to be exact. On this day, Margaret Anderson arrived at Mount Rainier National Park to begin another day working as a park ranger. So other than the fact that it was the first day of the year, there really shouldn't have been anything else different about her shift that day. Now, it was the middle of the winter, and so the roads were icy and they were dangerous, and therefore it fell on park rangers to enforce tire chain laws to ensure that everyone who entered the park would also leave the park safely. Unfortunately, on this day, there would be 2 individuals that would not make it out of Mount Rainier National Park alive. Now, one of them died in the line of duty, trying to keep the park and its visitors and their fellow rangers safe, and the other one died as a result of a desperate and futile attempt to avoid paying for their crimes. In the early morning hours on Sunday, January 1st, 2012, 24-year-old Benjamin Barnes was involved in a shooting in Seattle, which this allegedly happened over a dispute about a firearm, apparently. The shooting was the tipping point in Barnes's life, a life that had been sliding downhill for quite some time. Barnes had been enlisted in the United States Army, and he even served some time in Iraq, apparently, but he was eventually kicked out of the Army after getting arrested for DUI, among a few other things. I know that he had recently lost a friend, an Army friend, due to suicide. He had also been recently dumped by his girlfriend because of increasingly volatile behavior on his part. And he was considered so dangerous at this point that he was only allowed to visit his daughter when he was supervised. And so by the time the first day of 2012 rolled around, Barnes was reportedly, at rock bottom. He was homeless and he was living out of his car in the middle of the winter. So this dispute in Seattle happens. Up to 4 people are shot, and then Benjamin Barnes, he fled town, and for some reason he went right for Mount Rainier National Park. He must have made it through the park entrance gate without incident, but he eventually did drive up to a ranger checkpoint between the Longmire and Paradise areas of the national park. The park's spokesman would go on to state that Barnes's vehicle, quote, blew through that checkpoint and didn't stop. And this obviously got the attention of the park rangers, who immediately initiated a high-speed pursuit of Barnes and also called ahead for backup. Ranger Margaret Anderson was stationed further up the road near Paradise, I guess, and when she heard about the vehicle chase that was heading her way, she decided to move her vehicle into the road in order to block the suspect. Her and one of her fellow rangers that she was with made an on-the-spot decision to attempt to arrest Barnes before he made it further into the park, further into an area that had large amounts of innocent park visitors that could potentially be harmed by him. Barnes drove up to Anderson's vehicle, and then he apparently did a U-turn before jumping out and opening fire on Anderson and her fellow ranger using a high-powered rifle. This all happened, in just a split second. It happened so quickly, in fact, that Anderson didn't even have a chance to draw her gun, let alone actually return fire and defend herself. So he's firing on these rangers, and he actually missed Anderson's partner, but unfortunately, he didn't miss Anderson. He hit her, and she was quickly able to alert authorities, I'm assuming over the radio, that she had been shot, but unfortunately, she did not survive for much longer after this. Her partner ended up driving away after this initial gunfire, and when backup did finally arrive, they were also fired upon by Barnes as they attempted to retrieve her out of her vehicle. So that obviously slowed things down, and by the time they reached her, she had already passed. Super sad. She is survived by her husband, who's also a park ranger at Mount Rainier National Park, apparently, and she's also survived by her 2 daughters. So after the shooting, Benjamin Barnes just abandoned his vehicle and he fled into the harsh winter wilderness of Mount Rainier National Park. The park was immediately closed to new visitors after this happened. I believe that those who were already in the park were forced to either evacuate or to shelter inside the park's buildings. It was obviously a very tense and dangerous situation. A massive manhunt was launched, and the authorities even brought in helicopters with infrared cameras, as well as other aircraft, and of course, hundreds of law enforcement agents who were searching on foot. And because it was the middle of the winter, there was up to 5 feet of snow in many areas throughout the search perimeter, which definitely complicated the search efforts, but of course, this very same factor would also complicate things for the fleeing suspect, who was not equipped to be traveling through the snow or equipped to survive a freezing cold night for that matter. These harsh winter conditions proved to be too challenging for Barnes because the following morning, he was found dead near the base of a popular waterfall for hikers to visit. When they found Barnes, it was immediately apparent that he was only wearing a t-shirt, jeans, and 1 shoe. By the way, when they found him, it was apparent that he had not taken his own life, and obviously law enforcement didn't kill him. He had died because of the extreme cold. He was found completely defeated, lying face down in a creek. He was laying there dead right where he belonged, and I'll admit that this story isn't quite as mysterious as the previous 2, but I still wanted to include it in order to illustrate the sacrifice that park rangers rarely but do sometimes have to make. And I do still have a few questions about this story as well. My first question is, why the hell did Barnes choose Mount Rainier National Park as his place to run to? Now, on one hand, I kind of get it, because maybe he thought a national park would mean like lots of deserted wilderness and easy places to hide, which I mean, there is a lot of deserted wilderness in Mount Rainier National Park, but on the other hand, he had apparently been to the park on many occasions. So therefore, he would have known that it would be crawling with park rangers, there'd be law enforcement there, and he also would have known that he would have had to go through a gate to even enter the park. One thing I could not find an answer to for some reason while I was researching is if this gate is manned during the winter. But either way, this entrance gate is basically a permanent checkpoint that he 100% would have known about. And so if he's on the run, why didn't he go to one of Washington State's numerous national forests and other public land wilderness that would have zero law enforcement present, especially in the winter? I don't know, if he was trying to hide, it just seems like those would be a better option than a heavily trafficked, heavily regulated national park. But anyways, speaking of the gate, the entrance to Mount Rainier National Park, again, I'm wondering, how did he get through this gate without any problems? Maybe it's not manned in the winter. Leave a comment if you know the answer to this. I just couldn't find the answer for some reason. And so if it's not manned, then that kind of explains it. But I mean, either way, the fact that he ran from the checkpoint further into the park makes me feel like he would have not wanted to stop at the park's entrance gate. And so I'm not sure what happened there. And also, why the hell did he run at the checkpoint in the first place? I mean, if he had been stopped, he probably would have just been sent on his way if he had chains, or he would have been turned around if he didn't have chains. These are all interesting questions, but then again, Benjamin Barnes was on the run. He was possibly intoxicated, and he was definitely not thinking straight, so maybe asking these final questions is just kind of pointless. At the end of the day, he was probably just acting on instinct, and I really doubt that there was any logic involved in his decision making. And because of him, the National Park Service lost a selfless ranger, and Margaret Anderson's daughters and her husband, well, they lost their mom, and he lost his wife. May Ranger Margaret Anderson rest in peace. My heart goes out to her family and all the families of any fallen law enforcement officers for that matter. If you made it this far into the video, make sure you're subscribed so that you can help us reach our admittedly ambitious goal of getting to 1 million subscribers. And more importantly, I encourage you to honor Margaret Anderson, Dwayne McClure, and Jeff Christensen in the comments. One more time, don't forget to check out our sponsor, Trainwell, formerly known as Copilot. If you click the link at the top of the description, you're gonna get 14 days free with your own expert personal trainer. YouTube seems to think that you'd enjoy watching this video next, so give it a click, and thank you so much for watching my content.